values, and principles. Of course, we've seen that that in different parts of the world, there were different movements around open science that were starting to emerge, but we did not have until very recently a global understanding of what open science is, how it should work, and how it should work so that it is beneficial for all the different regions, for all the different countries, for all the different scientists and other actors of open science. So that is the reason why in UNESCO we have started this process of development of a global recommendation on open science. The process started in 2019 when 193 member states of UNESCO asked the organization, the Secretariat, to lead an inclusive, transparent, consultative process that would gather all the voices so that we can understand what different actors think of open science, what the different challenges are, what the different opportunities could be, and how open science could really be structured at the global level, and then of course regional, national, institutional levels, to ensure that the, let's say, mistakes of traditionally closed science systems are not repeated with open science. So for 2 years, we've had different consultations around the world with different actors to be able to come up with a text of a recommendation that is acceptable to everybody, where everybody can find themselves. And then this text was also negotiated by member states in May 2021, and they had then unanimously adopted the final text of the recommendation in November 2021, so exactly a year ago, at the 41st session of UNESCO's General Conference, which is a place where all the member states, all the countries that form UNESCO come together. So these UNESCO recommendations, and in particular the recommendation on open science, as I said, is a legal instrument. It's a normative instrument. The countries that adopt this instrument um, uh, also decide that
I
they
all the
will
time
take.
hoping, but I don't know. I did.
Excuse me. I think I'm just
Try to
hearing
figure it out.
everybody. So yes, the countries are asked to take whatever legislative or other steps that need to be taken so that they actually implement the principles and the norms that are defined in this particular recommendation. So it is what we call a soft law, but it still has a very high moral and political value. And indeed, the countries are supposed to come back to UNESCO every 4 years and also say what progress has been made. So just a few highlights of the recommendation. As I said, it is the first international normative instrument on open science that contains the internationally agreed definition, core values, and guiding principles for open science. It also recognizes very clearly the multiple actors and stakeholders of open science. So of course, we are talking about scientists, researchers, we are talking about universities, research institutions, but we're also talking about funders, policymakers, publishers, innovators, engineers. We are talking civil society, other knowledge holders. So we are talking about the entire ecosystem of open science. And in that context, there are different actions that are recommended at different levels and different innovative approaches to be able to implement open science in accordance to these principles and values. And another important thing, I think, with the recommendation is that, and this goes along the lines of what Colleen was saying before, is that it calls for the development of a comprehensive open science monitoring framework. So we need to collectively define what do we want to monitor as open science? What do we want to have as impact, and how do we monitor this impact? So rather than focusing on a few numbers that we would be looking at, we really do want to try and understand with open science, how do we measure impact and how do we monitor progress made with regards to this impact that is desired from applying open science and implementing open science. So with regards to the common definition, the importance, I think, of the definition from the recommendation is that it sees open science as a variety of different movements, different practices, different actions that are all aimed at increasing scientific collaborations and sharing of information for the benefits of both science and society. Actions that make multilingual scientific knowledge openly available, accessible, and reusable for everyone, and also a variety of movements that open the processes of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and communication to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. So a very broad perspective on what open science is, knowing also that it refers to basic sciences, fundamental sciences, applied sciences, humanities, social sciences, natural sciences. So really encompassing the entire scientific system as well. With regards to the different parts of open science, again, the recommendation takes a very broad perspective on what the different elements of open science are. And we talk about open scientific knowledge, open science infrastructures, open engagement of societal actors, and open dialogue with other knowledge systems as the fundamental pillars of open science, with science communication also part of a fundamental part of open science actions. So when it comes to open scientific knowledge, of course, we have open access, and we will be hearing about that a little bit later during the day and in the next few days. Open research data, open educational resources, open source software and source code, and open hardware. So all of these elements are part of the need to have more open scientific knowledge, more accessible scientific knowledge. But in addition to that, as I said, there are open science infrastructures which are critical, both physical and virtual, which are shared, which are collaborative, and which allow for open science to happen in different parts of the world, and also to happen in a way that is equitable in nature and beneficial for all. Open engagement of societal actors. These are a few new things, I would say, maybe in the way that the open science is defined. Really, in this part, the idea is to include societal actors, society more broadly, through citizen science, participatory science, scientific volunteering, or other actions that would, in a way, bring society closer to science, get their voices out more prominently, of course, in collaboration with the scientific community, in collaboration with research institutions. And then open dialogue with other knowledge systems, which includes dialogues with traditional knowledge holders, indigenous knowledge holders, local communities. So in order to really find solutions for the problems that are faced, particularly at the local level, it is very important that all sources of knowledge are being considered, and then there is dialogue between these sources of knowledge. And that's really something that has come up quite strongly from the consultations that we had, particularly in Africa. This idea of traditional knowledge being and indigenous knowledge being important source of knowledge came particularly also from the region, and there is a need to understand how to better work between science and these different other knowledge systems. There are also different objectives and key areas for action, and under each action area, there are specific actions for different actors. But the idea really is to promote a common understanding of open science, to develop an enabling policy environment, invest in infrastructures and services for open science, in training, education, digital literacy, to capacity building for human resources and then for institutional resources as well, to foster a culture of open science and align incentives for open science, which is also extremely important, and you will be hearing about that later on in the day, to promote innovative approaches and this collaboration, international multi-stakeholder in the context of open science. The idea really from particular UNESCO perspective is that the actions around open science really should lead to reducing the digital, technological, and knowledge gaps that exist between countries, but also within countries. So just to kind of sum up, because these are some of the questions that we receive very often from different people who are involved in the open science ecosystem. The importance of open science is that it really can increase quality and integrity of science by making science and including of course, scientific publications and data that come with that. The quality and integrity of science is actually increased. So by opening science, we do not decrease its quality. On the contrary, the idea is that the quality is increased. It also contributes to collective benefit and to this notion of science as a global public good. Open science contributes to equity and fairness, particularly when it comes to distribution of knowledge. Diversity and inclusiveness is something that is very important for open science, and the research, open science research really kind of evolves around diversity and inclusiveness as well. Open science is more transparent, high quality, diverse, inclusive, multilingual, equitable. So we really do want to insist on this, on these notions and on these principles and values, basically, of open science. So indeed, the key values that are defined in the recommendation for open science is quality and integrity, collective benefit, equity and fairness, and diversity and inclusiveness. Transparency, equality of opportunities, collaboration, flexibility, as we heard before, sustainability. These are all the different principles that need to be taken into account if we want to operationalize these values of open science in open science practices. One important notion also is that we are talking about as open as possible and as close as necessary, which means that there are, of course, instances where not all the data and not all the information can be shared and can be open. There are issues related to privacy, to security, intellectual property, etc. So we do take that into account, and we do have to balance out the different moments and situations in which open science acts, and how do we open data, information, knowledge, infrastructures, etc. Open does not mean unregulated. It does not mean that authors lose all of their rights. It does not mean that that there are no rules around the way in which data is shared or data can be used. And it does not mean that there are absolutely no costs related to open science. Open science does come with some costs, but some of these costs are not new costs. It's just the idea would be to distribute the funds already available in a different way, so that there is more focus on accessibility, more focus on collaboration, more focus of impact of scientific research. We've heard before, and I completely agree with Dr. Osman's summary of the big challenges for implementation of open science and the UNESCO recommendations. There is a need to change the conventional scientific culture. There is a need to build human and institutional capacity, to develop or to strengthen adequate infrastructures, including reliable internet connectivity. There is a need to align incentives, to revise criteria for evaluation of scientific excellence and careers so that they align with open science practices, and to address also some of these unintended negative consequences of open science practices. And we will hear about that a little bit later on. So it is important to focus on capacity building, policies, funding and incentives, infrastructures, and then monitoring, as we were saying before. And it is very heartening to see that there is a lot of initiatives which are being taken, particularly on the African continent, around these different key issues for open science. There are several countries that are currently developing their national open science policies or roadmaps: Nigeria, South Africa, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Mozambique, Botswana. All of them are in a certain stage of development of their open science policies. There are some institutional policies that are being developed in different countries. There's capacity building initiatives, and I'm here just citing one. There are many others that are happening across the continent. There is a myriad of platforms and infrastructures that actually will be there to support and promote open science, including the African Open Science Platform. that has now been set up. And there are different actors that are doing excellent work on the continent to promote open science, to work with different actors, to make sure that open science really is beneficial, in particular for the visibility and the usefulness and benefit of African science. There is also more and more institutions like the African Union, the regional and sub-regional bodies, as we heard before, who are also interested in supporting open science. So there really is a very good momentum, and it's great that the African universities are also looking at open science during this next few days. Going back a little bit to the recommendation on open science, we do have some specific recommendations that are kind of focusing on or directed to universities and research institutions. And the idea really is for those institutions and universities to adopt statements of principle in line with recommendation of open science and to encourage open science practices, learning from each other, and also to change the current research culture and recognize researchers for open science practices, including sharing, collaborating, engaging with other researchers, making their research more accessible. So we are very happy to announce that very soon, in the next month or so, we will be launching a UNESCO toolkit that will look into some of these issues. We have a checklist for universities on implementation of the recommendation on open science. We have a brief on funding open science. What does it mean? How do we do it? And on how to develop policies for open science. So hopefully all of these materials will also be useful for African universities as they're looking into how to implement open science in their different institutions. Just to finish maybe with an invitation to the upcoming World Science Forum in South Africa. We are going to have on the 7th of December, an Open Science Day during the World Science Forum, where some of these toolkits will be and some of these materials will be presented and launched, and we would be very happy to have you there. So I do encourage you to follow the work on the UNESCO recommendation on open science. We have some working groups that we have constituted. You are very welcome to join them. They're open working groups. Here is the contact, here is the website, and I would be very happy to have a conversation with all of you later on and respond to any possible questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anna Pesek, for such a lovely presentation from UNESCO. One key thing that I took was open does not mean it's not regulated. It means the author, it's not as if the author doesn't have the right to his or her work, but then it will still be regulated. Thank you so much. We'll definitely summarize everything after the presentation. So thank you once again. I'd like to call on Mr. Emmanuel Boache, who is an ambassador for the Center for Open Science, to give his presentation or do his presentation. So if Mr. Emmanuel Boache, if you are here, kindly take the floor to give your presentation on open science, global and continental perspectives. Thank you. Mr. Emmanuel Boache, if you are here, kindly take the floor. I assume you are speaking because you are muted, but we cannot hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, please, we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let me share my screen then. Okay. Greetings to you all. My name is Emmanuel Boache. I'm an ambassador for the Center for Open Science, and today I'll be presenting on Open Science Global and Continental Perspective. This presentation is about the various groups that have sprung out along the way since the advent of open science. Of course, it's not going to be an exhaustive list because a lot is going on in the open science, which is a big umbrella. But what we're going to do today is to introduce you to some of the groups, associations, and etc. that are working to contribute to the advancement of open science and how they are doing this. Is going to be a brief introduction, and we'll try to cover as much as we can. We're going to start looking at it from a global perspective, then we zoom into Africa and what is going on in Africa. So how has the journey of open science been so far? I mean, like I said earlier, since the advent of open science, several groups and associations have sprung up. And what they've done and really helped is that they've helped provide a clearer understanding of the core areas of open science, such as open access, open science hardware, and etc. And they've contributed so much to the advancement of open science by developing resources and support systems that allow seamless adoption of open science by institutions, individuals, and etc. And one thing that is key to open science is that they've collaborated in popularizing open science globally. So what are the groups that are out there that are helping to advance open science? I believe knowledge about these groups will help us when we want to go on an open science journey. We can reach out to them to partner with them, and they have similar resources and etc. that we can fall on when we want to implement open science policies at our various institutions. The first one I'm going to talk about is the Center for Open Science, which is based in the USA, was started in 2013. And its mission is to increase openness, integrity, and reproducibility of research. And what the Center for Open Science seeks actually to do is to influence a cultural change rather than an individual change. It believes that if we want to ensure that open science is globally adopted, we need to change the cultures and the incentives that actually influence researcher behaviors in adopting open science, and provide the right infrastructure and business models and support these ones too. So the Center for Open Science has contributed to the advancement of open science by providing the Open Science Framework. The Open Science Framework is a software which acts as a collaboration tool and a workflow system for researchers and institutions. As a collaboration tool, it allows a lot of researchers around the globe to come together and work on one project. It has integrated version control system to track various updates of the progress. It has also integrated all the various resources that researchers use in their research process, such as Mendeley and etc. And then it also has the TOP guidelines, which is a transparency and openness promotion guidelines, which is there for journals to adopt, and then it helps track how journals are adopting open science policies, which is a different metric to judge journals compared to the initial citation metrics that are there. And then the Center of Open Science also has an ambassador program that is open to people across the world. I mean, it allows you to directly work with them on projects that seem to advance open science across the world. The next one we are going to talk about is SPAC Europe. SPAC Europe main aim is to set the defaults to open access when it comes to European research. So what it seeks to do is to make sure that research that is being done in Europe is freely accessible to all. And it is doing this by ensuring that it influences open policies across European institutions and publishers, so that everything that they do is in line with open access mandates and policies. And one thing that is so key to SPAC is to enable equity, and they're currently trying to do research in that area to ensure that whilst advancing open science, all the individuals, infrastructures, and stakeholders are well enabled to do this, not a situation whereby inequalities are established and others are better positioned to pursue open science as compared to others. So it's also an organization you can reach out to. Then we'll also talk about Open Air. Open Air's main aim is to shift scholarly communication towards openness and transparency. It's similar to SPAC Europe. And what has been doing so well in the world of open science is that it's been creating and operating services for open science. And these services for open science are usually contributed by the community of open science advocates that are there. It has a wonderful resource for tracking open science or observing open science across the globe and in Europe. It has resources such as the Open Science Project that gives you introduction as to how to implement open science in your institutions too. So these are resources that you could follow if you want to implement open science at your institutions. Then we have the European Open Science Cloud. I mean, this is a wonderful system that has been created in Europe, which serves as an aggregated platform where all infrastructure that are available and make sure open science adoption is easy are brought together at one place, and they are easily accessible. So it's more like a system of systems where whatever you need to ensure you are part of the open science movement, researchers, institutions, funders are available at one platform, and then it's easily accessible. It has a portal, which where you go, you have several infrastructures that are there. The e-infrastructure allows access to HPC classes, which are high performance computing classes. It allows you to cloud service, access to cloud services. It also has data analysis tools and management tools that are freely available to individuals that are able to access the portal. It allows individuals to share their applications or software there openly and easily accessible to individuals across Europe and the world. So it's a wonderful infrastructure that is trying to ensure that every aspect of open science infrastructure is brought together at one place, and then you can go there and get everything you need when you want to pursue open science in your research system. Then we'll look at Open Educational Resources Commons. This is a wonderful public data library of open educational resources. It's a platform that allows teachers, institutions, and etc. to come together to collaborate on teaching and learning. It allows the development of curriculum. It allows the modification of curriculum and development of new teaching pedagogies. It allows collaboration between individuals across the world. And it has wonderful resources that you can fall onto, and it encompasses every aspect of education, including open science, the sciences, the arts, etc., engineering. And it's a freely available resource for anyone across the world. You can use their resources, your open author, to start your own forum there. It has the hubs which aggregate certain aspects of the educational resources into one place. You can get all of them at once, and it has microsites. And these are wonderful resources that you can take advantage of in ensuring that you are adopting open science in your communications. Then the open source initiative, we acknowledge that one aspect of open science is open source, which has to do with free available source codes for software. And the open source initiative that has been in existence for a long time has been one of the major advocates for this. And what it does is that it educates individuals, institutions, and all stakeholders about the benefits of open source. And what it has done is to help develop policies and principles of open source. Like it was initially said, open does not mean everything is free and nothing is guarded. There are policies and principles that guide advancement of open science, and open source initiative has been key in establishing policies and principles that guide the open source community. And what it also does is it builds bridges among different constitutions. It helps to bring all the stakeholders across the world together at one place, so that they'll be able to work together towards the advancement of open science in the open source realm. Turing Way. The Turing Way initially started as a handbook for reproducible and ethical and collaborative data science, but since its inception, it has advanced to a bigger project which has several guides for reproducible research, project design, communication, collaboration, and ethical research. What the Turing Way believes is that, right now, there is a lot on researchers to ensure that when they want to do their research, they adopt open principles so that by the end, their work is very reproducible, but not a lot of training is being given to researchers when it comes to this regard. So the Turing Way serves as an open platform which provides instructions on how to go about doing a reproducible research, and it gives instructions on how you're going to design your projects, how you're going to communicate it, how you're going to collaborate, and how you're going to ensure that whatever you are doing is also ethical, and at the end, your work is reproducible. So it's a wonderful resource for individuals that want to go ahead in adopting open science in their workflows. Then we are looking at the Gathering for Open Science Hardware. Is a convening entity for the global open science hardware community. Open science hardware is one aspect of open science, and God shares as one of the platforms that allows all stakeholders in the open science hardware community to come together and work towards the advancement of open science hardware. And it believes that global access to hardware for science is key in the advancement of open science hardware. Like designs for scientific hardware should be freely and openly available, and everyone should be able to contribute to the designs and freely use them and manufacture them, and etc. So that's what GOSH is for. What they do is that they organize occasional conferences and seminars where they have to talk about all these things, and then they introduce new policies and etc. to guide the direction of open science hardware across the globe. Then we have the Open Access Scholarly Publishing Association. This is an association for all scholarly publishers that are into open access. Is a community made up of different publishers that are advancing the goal of open scholarship. And what it has been doing, it has been encouraging and leveling up research as the predominant communication model. This is something that initially wasn't there, but right now OSPA is ensuring that a lot of organizations, publishers are adopting open access as their predominant communication model. And what it has also done, it has also helped to set principles and guidelines to ensure that open access scholarly publishing is not done anyhow, but it's actually having strict guidelines that are supposed to be followed. So there may be disparities within the adoption of open access publishing. Then the directory of open access journal. This is an extensive index of diverse open access, just like the name says. It allows you to access all the open access journals around the globe. And what they are doing is that they want to ensure that quality content is really available to everyone across the world. And what they are helping to increase the visibility, accessibility, reputation, and impact of open access journals. So journals that are in open access are registered on this platform, and then it allows them to be easily accessed worldwide. Then we have the Confederation of Open Access Repositories. It's also an international organization of individual repositories and repository networks. What it does is bring all the repository networks and individual repositories together. And it's helping to ensure that the community of open access repositories is built, and then they are led in a manner. It has various resources that ensures that whatever is being done by open access repositories conforms to certain standards. It has a repository toolkit that can be used by repositories around the world to develop certain frameworks for them. It has instructions on how to ensure that good practices are observed by repositories across the globe. Then ROMAP serves as a platform which kind of tracks open access mandates and policies around the world. So it's a freely available platform where individuals that are into open access mandates and policy developments are able to register their mandates and policies, and this can be easily accessed by anyone around the world. It has a wonderful searchable international registry where you can go and search open access repository mandates and policies. You can do this by country, by continent, or by institutions or funders, and etc. And these are wonderful resources that can help you when you want to develop an open access repository mandates and policies. You can learn from what has already been done by institutions across the globe, and then use that as a starting point to build your own policies and mandates. So it's a wonderful resource that you can fall to when you want to develop open access repository mandates and policies. Then the initiative for open citation. This initiative, like the name says, is looking at ensuring that citations are made open. Yes, open access is a wonderful movement, but the initiative for open citation also believes that citation data to scholarly work should also be freely available, and in a way that they are structured. That means they are machine readable, they are separable. That means that when you access citations from these sources, you don't necessarily need to go and read the original material, but you can easily get the citation data. And then they are also open. That means they are freely accessible. It serves as a graph that allows you to explore the various connections between knowledge fields. So it has this wonderful feature that it allows you to explore connections between various knowledge fields and see how certain knowledge fields are advancing or are connected together. The initiative of open abstract is similar to the initiative for open science, just that this one has a restriction to abstracts per se. Abstract serve as the doorway to research or scholarly work, and then it tells you whether you want to proceed to read the research work or not, or it falls within your area or not. So the initiative of open abstract seeks to ensure that there is unrestricted availability of abstract. A lot of abstract to scholarly work are still under restrictions and etc. So what the initiative of open abstract seeks to do is to ensure that there is a centralized availability of open abstract in trusted repositories, and it usually recommends that journals and publishers that are open to this movement will submit the abstract to Crossweb where they can all be easily accessed. Then reproducibility for everyone. Reproducibility for everyone has been one of the advances of reproducible research across the globe, and they've been helping to increase the adoption of such practices at scale. It is a community that is made up of individuals across the globe, and they've come together to develop reusable models with instructor notes and guides that are freely available. So if you want to have a reproducibility workshop, they have these reusable models there that are freely available on their website in the form of PPTs and PDFs that you can use and then modulate according to your preference, and then introduce your locales to reproducible research. It has wonderful resources on how to use electronic lab notebooks, how to do protocol sharing, how to do reagent sharing. They have these platforms where individuals come together to do all these things, protocol sharing, reagent sharing. It has wonderful ways and how to go about data visualization of your research work. So it has wonderful resources, and they are also open to conducting workshops with the partner with institutions and continents and nations to conduct workshops in this area too. Peer review has been one of the propagators of open peer review in the world, and it's a wonderful platform with various resources on how to go about reviewing work very easily. It propagates open peer review, and what it seeks to do is to bring equity and transparency to scholarly peer review. It has this training program called Peer Review Open Reviewers that is open to individuals across the globe. These are in levels depending on your experience when it comes to reviewing. And what it seeks to do is to train individuals on how to constructively give feedback to reviews, and it allows reviewers to come together, work on preprints, and then publish these preprints openly, and that can be freely accessible by anyone, including the authors of the paper. So it's a wonderful group, and you can reach out to them and then see how you can collaborate with them in ensuring that individuals are well trained in how to offer peer reviews. Then the Open Life Science. Open Life Science is a cohort-based training program which uses a mentorship approach to ensure that people who are interested in open science ambassadors are given the right resources that they need to ensure that projects that they lead in terms of advancing open science in their communities are well done and established. So it's a program that is open to everyone across the globe. So if you're interested in becoming an open science ambassador, and then you want to receive training and mentorship on how to conduct open science projects, the Open Life Science is a wonderful place to go to. You can reach out to them, you can apply for the program, and then when you are admitted to the program, you get to be mentored by experts in the areas of open science. They're going to guide you on your project. Ideally, individuals that are admitted usually have started a project or they're about to start a project. So you can work alone on your project, or you can work together in a team, and then you can best know how to go about your open science project in your community. So now we're going to zoom in into Africa and then what is going on in Africa in terms of the area of open science. I mean, it's been brilliant. A lot of organizations too have come up in the area of open science. Like I said, this is not an exhaustive list, so we're not going to be able to talk about everything. But one of the organizations that I believe really need to be talked about is LipSense. I mean, LipSense has been key to contributing to the advancement of open science in Africa. What it has done is that it looks at community building by engaging research and education networks across Africa, and then it brings them together to help them define their priorities, help them to share knowledge, develop relevant services, and then it has these wonderful resources on science policy templates, wonderful resources on case studies, wonderful resources on presentations. The science policy templates come in national science policy templates and institutional policy templates. So these are wonderful resources that you can fall on when you want to develop policies for your institutions or nations. So LipSense has been key, and I think it's one area that we need to fully support. Then the African Open Science Platform. I mean, this is one of the groups that have also come up in Africa that is supporting open science. What the African Open Science has been doing is to ensure that Africa rises to the digital challenge that comes with the advancement of open science on the continent. So it looks to ensure that open science adoption through hardware, communications, and software infrastructure is fully supported on the African continent. And then Africa is able to come together and develop powerful digital tools and cutting-edge data science to ensure open science is properly done across the globe. And it has wonderful resources such as the infrastructure policies, open access journals that you can follow on to. Then we have Africa OSH. Africa OSH has been one of the proponents of open science hardware on the African continent, and they've helped create conversations around open science hardware in Africa. It's a platform where Africans come together and showcase their innovations and ideas, work together, meet investors, and etc. What they do is that they've been organizing open science hardware summits across Africa, which normally are done in various countries yearly. So there's something you can engage in if you're interested in open science hardware. Then we have Africa Archive. Africa Archive was one of the proponents for preprint adoption in the African continent. It's an open knowledge commons of African scholarly work. And what they've been doing is that they've been ensuring that this community-led digital archive for African research allows easy publishing of African work, and they accept various aspects of scholarly work such as postprints and etc. And they've been doing brilliantly so far. I'll not speak so much about them since we have representatives here too. Then finally, we talk about Open Research Africa, which is an open access platform with a rapid peer-reviewed index and fair model. They allow a submission of a wide range of article types, and then they have this wonderful resource gateways that are for institutions that allow institutions to bring together all the scholarly work that is going on there. And they have collections to that aggregates research of various sections in the world. There are also various other groups across Africa and across the world that we could have talked about, and some of them are such as the SCORS. I would have loved to talk about SCORS, but I'm going to have a representative from SCORS today. And we have open citation possibility, etc. Then to conclude, I would say that it is essential to know about all these efforts that are going on together in the world of open science, because one common word and consistent word in open science is collaboration. I mean, all our speakers talked about collaboration, 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 but you cannot collaborate without the knowledge of the groups that are out there. So knowing that these groups are out there and then supporting their existing efforts that are currently ongoing is key to a global adoption of common standards in the pursuit of a more open science around the world. Thank you very much. Hello, Naomi. So I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Emmanuel Boache, for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Emmanuel. Okay, so our next presentation is to be from Professor Ismail Raffles, who is from the Leiden University, and he was supposed to present on how open science influences and impacts university competitiveness and ranking. But he had already sent a message earlier that he will be unavailable today. And so we will be playing a presentation that he made in one event that he attended back in Egypt also. So if you do not mind, kindly be on standby as we do the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. And so thank the Association of African Universities, the Training Center and Communication, PLOS, and the British University in Egypt for organizing the event, and Joy for inviting me. Let me see if I manage to share the screen. Here we are. And I'm going now to full presentation, but not the right slide. Okay, so can you please confirm that you see?
Yes, we can see you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Excellent. Good. So I'm going to have these discussions about Open Science University rankings. As Joy mentioned, my center, the Center for Science and Technology Studies at the University of Leiden, produces a ranking. And we have made
Professor Raffles? Professor Raffles?
by the professor in the previous presentation. Why is that? Well, the reasons I believe why university management is not taking open science so as seriously as they should, maybe at the moment, is because their notion, when worried about attracting students, they're concerned about prestige. And the prestige, they see it as coming from the traditional university rankings. It's the same applies for individual researchers. They're concerned about the reputation of their scientific contributions, which is understood as being focused on the traditional output publications. Now, the case that I'm going to make is that they are short-sighted in focusing in the traditional university rankings and in focusing only in publications, because these are old-fashioned notions of prestige, these narrowly academic notions of prestige are something of the 20th century. And in the 21st century, the prestige and performance is adopting more dimensions, which go in the directions signaled by open science, which is about the importance of collaboration, the importance of making societal contributions, particularly in the direction of the sustainable development goals. So it's not only open science the right thing to do, but if you are interested in your university to be doing very well in the rankings, not now, but 10 years from now, or 5 years from now, you should be looking at these other dimensions of prestige and performance that are related to societal contributions, to collaborations with societal stakeholders. Let's start by looking at what traditional rankings do, which are narrowly focused on, I would think, it's global north prestige. So we have the time higher education, academic ranking of world universities, the QS ranking. Many of them, you see that they have citations as a very important dimension. Now, in the case of the Times Higher Education, citations represent 30% of the weighting of the ranking. Now, we know that citations are biased. And moreover, they're biased towards the countries that have better coverage in the databases. And we know that, the perceptions of how good a university or a research is doing in terms of citations also has influence in the perception of reputation in research and in teaching. So actually, although the Times Higher Education, as is shown here, has these different dimensions of quality, the fact that reputation survey for teaching, reputation survey for research and citations make more than 50% of the weighting means that they are heavily biased towards the traditional notions of prestige as purely academic. And why are these notions of prestige so biased? Not only because of historical biases associated with colonial and post-colonial history, but also because the databases are extremely biased, as the librarians attending these workshops surely know. So here I have data produced by my colleague Ludo Waldman, Martin Weiss, and Mesian Van Eck, in which they show that even a Scopus, which is more comprehensive than the Web of Science, only has 27 million papers out of the 73 million papers that are available, that have been published, and that can be captured with a more comprehensive database such as Microsoft Academic. Now, the 50 million papers that are missing here are not equally distributed across the world. If you look at the coverage of journals by continent, and this was a study that was done by my former PhD student, Diego Chavarro, the University of Sussex, you see that the coverage of the publications published in Northern Europe or North America is around 40–50% in Scopus, whereas in the case of Africa or Latin America or Asia, we are somewhere between 10 and 20%. Therefore, with this much higher coverage of the publications in the global north, it is not surprise that reputation is seen from academic citations is biased towards the north. So basically, the main indicators used by the currently dominant university rankings are biased, and they do not do justice to the diverse functions, missions of research. We have this sentence from research evaluator David Resner to say, well, it's actually easier to use indicators which are out there than to think what are the goals that in universities should try to accomplish. And this is a problem because if we use existing indicators without thinking about the biases and the types of functions that they are measuring, what we end up, as it is explained in this article by George Sten and Leslie Chan, is that we end up being driven by the values that are behind the metrics, or by the biases that are behind the metrics. In the case of this prestige and indicators used in the current university rankings, we are driven by a logic of prestige that it's not paying justice to the many different missions that universities have. This is now being recognized in Europe by a very strong movement towards reforming research assessment. The European Commission put a document in the end of 2021, last year, asking for a coalition of organizations willing to engage in reforming their research assessment. This has been an extraordinary success. Unexpectedly, most of the top funding organizations and top university associations have joined. Currently, there were about 350 organizations included in debating a set of principles that should inform research assessment for research assessment to be more truthful to the goals of universities, in which you can find the full information in this website. And there are 4 key commitments. The first 3 commitments are about not overusing indicators more at the individual level. And the fourth commitment is very clear about avoiding the use of rankings of research organizations in research assessment. And by rankings, I mean the traditional rankings. So there is at the moment in Europe, and as I understand also in other continents such as Latin America, with CLACSO, the Latin American Social Science Research Council, being critical about rankings. Now, trying to answer the question posed by David Rosner. Okay, so if indicators should not be taken as the answer, if we have to think what the universities should accomplish, then we should ask, what are universities for? And then we come, of course, to the simple answer that the important contribution of universities is teaching the students the capabilities needed in society in a variety of fields, and generating new knowledge that is useful in society, either for curiosity issues. So I understand that a sun eclipse or a moon eclipse is something that is interesting for the public. I do wake up at 4 in the mornings sometimes to go and see the marvel of looking at how the moon has an eclipse. So this is important, but also for solving problems that are more related to societal needs. And this is where I think that open science can be a guidance. And I asked Anna Pershik from UNESCO yesterday if she could share this slide, in which she showed yesterday that the potential of open science is about introducing new notions of quality, about telling us that science can contribute to fill innovation gaps, and that open science can help in supporting research towards addressing sustainable development goals. The presentation by Rohina yesterday from PLOS also mentioned the importance of the credit system towards recognizing the different types of contributions of researchers. What this is telling us is that open science can help us in thinking what are the dimensions in university rankings that should be considered. And this is what we are going to see in this next section. The UNESCO recommendation on open science, I think it's really clear and really nice in making explicit the core values and guiding principles of open science, where in traditional university rankings we just have notions of prestige, abstract notions of prestige. In the UNESCO recommendation on open science, we see that the values that would guide the prestige are made explicit. And the core values are about science for the collective benefit. So science as a global public good. The importance of integrity, that the knowledge produced is reliable and is useful and beneficial for society. The importance that knowledge is made in a way that is equitable, that includes diverse population as the beneficiaries, and also in terms of diversity and inclusiveness, that different communities participate in making this knowledge. So these principles are in a way or help make specific the type of recommendations that were put by the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, or the Leiden Manifesto, of which I am one of the co-authors, in which almost 10 years ago already, we criticized the traditional ways of assessing, and we proposed that you could not use always the same indicators, but you needed to use indicators in a contextual manner, according to the understanding of the context of a given expert. And above all, you needed the 2 and 3 principles that you need to measure performance against the missions of the institution. Now, the missions of the institution, of institutions such as university, differ depending on the type of university. I have worked for a polytechnic university, and of course, a polytechnic university has a mission that is much more related to supporting the local development, for example, in agriculture or also in industry, which is related to the third point, which is about excellence in locally relevant research. So the open science is a guide, the ideas of an open science is a guide about what type of missions and what type of functions are needed to be considered. And for this also, and this is again the dimensions of the UNESCO recommendation on open science, we see that there are a variety of dimensions that might contribute to quality. On the one hand, there are the traditional scientific publications, which need to be made openly accessible, but also contributions to knowledge can come in the form of data, of research data, in the form of open educational resources, of software, of open hardware. So rather than just focusing in the outputs that are publications, we see that there are different types of outputs that are relevant. And therefore, there is the case for university rankings to consider to which extent universities might be contributing to research data, to educational resources. There is also a part which is about open science infrastructures. So whether, and this might be more the case for national centers, maybe than for universities. So whether the research infrastructure is open. The UNESCO recommendation on open science, I think, made an important contribution in highlighting that not only these green and pink dimensions of outputs and infrastructure are important, but also issues around collaboration are equally crucial for open science to thrive. And important, maybe the most important among these, are the participation of citizens and stakeholders in the development of science. It is now widely agreed that in order for research to become a benefit for society, it is crucial that the stakeholders participate in informing what type of knowledge is needed. And then there is also the issue of the dialogue between different knowledge systems here in blue. So one thing that let me stress again, I think it's crucial about the UNESCO recommendation on open science is the emphasis in open science, not just as outputs or infrastructure, but as collaborative practices between academic institutions and societal actors.
Ms. Dako, you can take over.
All right, thank you so much, Joy. We'll now take a presentation from Dr. Rhoda Wayenze. Mr. Abed will play the recording. Thank you.
And the role of research assessment. From the DORA perspective, this is an area that I find quite dear to my heart for many ways. As you said, Joy, a lot falls through the cracks when the focus is on numbers and numbers of papers that you've written and where they are published, impact factors. So a lot falls through the cracks. The area that I'm really passionate about that falls through the cracks is impact. Impact. We don't do research just for numbers, and we don't do research just for where it's published. We do research to impact the communities, we do research to contribute to development in whichever fields we are. And we need to find a way to ensure that that counts, that impact counts, the quality and impact. So in terms of reviewing research assessments, I hope that this discussion can help to begin to stimulate our thoughts. We don't have all the answers. We need answers from our regions as well in terms of what's going to work for us. So I'll touch on a few issues around research assessment from the DORA perspective, but also share a few of the tools as well as the links that are available on DORA's website that we can use, and also what's happening elsewhere in other universities in terms of the move towards encouraging improvements in open science. I hope, okay. So this is what I'll focus on in my presentation, but I'm also looking forward to engaging in the discussion in terms of what else and what is it that will work for us. So in terms of making this move from open access policies just for publications. I think the publications is what we all know most of the time, and Rohina has shared a lot of this extensively. But moving from this to sharing our data is one of the areas that we are all very nervous about. It's an issue of capacity, but a lot of things that we all feel uncomfortable about: who will access our data and how they will use it. And sometimes it's just the infrastructure and capacity to be able to manage and share this data. So there are quite a number of things that we need to have in place. So this has been a challenge for many countries. It's a challenge for many universities, but generally the issue of we in Africa are especially lagging in this space, but the same also is happening elsewhere. And if I could cite, for example, a review that was done around 2018, 2019 in European universities. This report, which is available on the web, shows that whereas 62% of these universities had a policy on open access research for publications, only 13% had policies on open access for data. So that is still lagging. And we don't know about the figures in Africa. Perhaps for Joy and the Association of African Universities, you might have more up-to-date data on this. But I know that we are perhaps lagging even further behind than what we see in the EU picture. And one of the main challenges, as I've noted, is the reward system. It's how we are ranked. For example, the rankings have just come out right now, and several universities, especially those that are at the top, are really excited about this. And in a way, we find that those rankings hold us back because we are just looking at where we fall based on how they see this. But it doesn't necessarily always dig deeper into the impact of our research on the communities. That's one of the areas that's been really difficult. And I know there's been changes in some of these metrics to try and capture these issues, but perhaps it's not happening as fast. So maybe we need to be part of the conversation in terms of how this environment can shift, not only internally within our universities, but also externally. And Joy and the rest of the partners here, perhaps we need to be engaging in wider advocacy to make sure that some of these rankings do not hold us back in terms of delivering what really science is meant for. And because of this also at individual level, we struggle as scientists in universities because our universities adopt the same measurements that are applied on the institutions when they weigh how we perform as individuals, when they decide who should be employed, when they decide who should be promoted, we apply the same metrics that these rankings apply on institutions, on the individuals as well. We apply the standards on how many papers you have, where the papers were published, the impact factors when we are making these decisions. So because of that, the incentives for most universities are driven towards pushing scientists and especially the young scientists who are most vulnerable and eager to go up the ladders, to focus on numbers and to focus on where the papers are published and to focus especially on the impact factors when they are making decisions on where to publish their work. So making sure that we make a move towards getting our data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable is really a big hurdle for us at individual level. And we need to be working on a number of issues to review our culture, our systems, our policies within the institutions and within our higher education sectors, and how they also view us as universities to be able to move this forward. So it's a broad range of issues. And outside the university that we need to be working on to achieve this shift. And when we think external environments that I have mentioned earlier, we need to see what is it that needs to give way or that needs to be improved in some of these metrics when we are making decisions, not only on promotions, but even on awards for research grants for institutions that have internal research grants, but also for funders. And but the beauty is that the funders are beginning to shift actually in terms of how they determine the science. And right now we see that many funders have changed even their CV formats so that they can fit within the broader sense of quality of research as well as impact. I have been changing my own CV. For example, when I do the NIH grants lately, my CV doesn't look the same as it looked previously, because now I have to mention the impact of my research and what difference it made in my field. And the same has happened for many funders as well. Wellcome Trust has changed this, and many others, as those of you on this in this meeting might attest. This has changed because they see the value of research beyond the quantity, the number of papers, and where you have published. So they are changing, and we need to also consider changing, perhaps as institutions, so that we can align with some of these. And there are a growing number of resources that are available and networks that are supporting universities, such as the partners here, the UNESCO, PLOS, and TCC as well as the Association of Universities in Africa, that are trying to support and move us to the next level in terms of reevaluating how we should work. But also similarly, other networks such as the DORA, the Declaration of Research Assessment, has developed quite a number of tools that are available and that universities can explore and consider using. Whether you are a signatory to DORA or not, these materials are available to you and you can access them freely online. This is just one of the examples that I was referring to earlier in terms of some of the challenges that other regions also face as they try to shift. And this is again on the same survey that I referred to, where most of the universities, as you can see, still valued the traditional metrics, the numbers of publications, the funding, and to a lesser extent, issues around quality and peer review. But very few of these universities recognized other important areas around research. For example, mentoring. Does mentorship really matter in universities? Is it rewarded? Mentorship and support for younger people or for students? What about outreach services and knowledge transfer? And that's what helps us to impact communities and to impact the development arena, as we saw in the SDG framework that was shared by Anna. And then, of course, there is the open science. Do we reward people for making their data openly available, or are we focusing just on the papers they've published and where they've published them? So you see that fewer universities up to today are focusing on this, and we need to change that perhaps if we are going to shift towards open science. So this is about DORA. DORA is about 10 years old now, since it was initiated during a meeting of the American Society for Cell Biology in San Francisco many years ago. That was in 2012, but it has grown, moving from the initial concerns around how the impact factors are driving decisions on promotions and funding, to expanding towards advocacy and supporting capacity building, but also developing tools and case studies of other institutions and how they've gone around trying to make these shifts, so that there are examples that we can learn from as we try to make our own shifts. So DORA has expanded to be able to provide that broader support, and all these tools are available on the website. There are many organizations as well as individuals across many countries that are now signatories of DORA through this period. And DORA is also continuing to grow and evolve in terms of supporting the signatory institutions so that they can make that journey towards the reforms that will help us, especially focusing on how we assess research and how that drives the behavior of researchers as well as institutions, and drives inequities and perhaps reduces the impact of research. So in terms of assessing, again, as we've heard from several speakers, this is an area that is fairly complex, because to make a shift in terms of what we value as researchers and as research institutions, higher education institutions, we have to make a shift across the entire ecosystem within and outside, and how it influences the way we think and act. So this is a complex area, and similar to the open research movement, research assessment reform has been difficult over the years, because it has to change issues across the entire system. So making this even more difficult is individuals' interventions based on individuals changing alone is not going to help. And also focusing just on one university might be difficult. So we need a network across universities. We need a network that will also touch on the external environment, our higher education sector and how they value us, and also research and innovation mechanisms within our countries, and how they value a university that is productive is really important. If they are going to continue to measure our productivity based on numbers and numbers of papers, it's going to make it very difficult for us to shift. So this is what makes it really difficult, but it doesn't mean that we should not work on it. It just means we need to appreciate the complexities, and we need to advocate for those areas that are beyond our control, so that the relevant actors can begin to also reform. And that's why we need national level reforms if we are going to reform as institutions within the countries where we are based. So we need to be mindful of this. We need to advocate for that change to happen, but we also at the same time need to review where we are as institutions, so that we can also make the shift and support individuals within our institutions to enhance the capacity, change the culture and thinking to make this happen. So DORA has several tools that are available that focus on some of these areas, and that you can access on the website for DORA, in case you would like to be able to use some of these tools. But also DORA has been doing a lot of advocacy and reaching out to funders. There are several funders that are now signatories to DORA and that are represented within the network, as well as the board of DORA. And because of this, we have started seeing the shifts, which I referred to earlier, that the funding institutions are also changing, because previously they were focusing on the same quantitative metrics that made it very difficult for us, and we had to conform. But now that they are shifting, it makes it so much easier for us also to shift. And we are doing this through a number of networks. We are doing webinars and opening up and getting other stakeholders to participate. And I do appreciate sharing this as well. Then there are the resources that I talked about, the case studies. You can find this on the website. They are available, and I'll highlight one of these, which is the SPACE rubric that helps institutions to begin to move and walk that journey of achieving these reforms. You can find this document in a detailed form on the DORA website. But the key thing about this is that it was developed also in a participatory manner with individuals as well as institutions across a number of countries, across 26 countries and 6 continents, to try and take care of the uniquenesses across the region in terms of developing this tool. And I would also like to emphasize that when we do look at these tools, they do not assume a one-size-fits-it-all, because institutions are at very different levels in terms of their capacities, in terms of their policies, and also in terms of their reforms. So this tool does allow flexibilities for the institution to be able to cater for those uniquenesses in terms of where the institution is. But it's also important to look beyond individuals, as I mentioned earlier, to the institutional conditions and infrastructure, to gauge and support and make sure that we improve the institutional capabilities and also focus on the impact of the interventions that we institute.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abed. That was a presentation from Dr. Rhoda Wayenze. And we'll now call on Ms. Rohina Anand, the Executive Director of PLOS, to give her presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. Right, I'm just going to try and share my screen.
Sure. Yes, please.
Can you see presentation mode?
Yes, please. Go ahead. Thank
Fantastic.
you.
Thank you. So, as I said earlier, I'm really delighted and honoured to be with you here today as part of this African Universities Day. And I think the title of my talk in the programme was Open Science, a publisher's perspective on providing equity. And that is what I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to talk to you about PLOS's perspective on that. And we are a publisher, of course, but I think our mission-driven and fully open nature makes us quite unique in the publisher sphere and space. And so our approach is perhaps slightly different than others who you might be more familiar with in terms of those traditional publishers. Anyway, so let me start with a quick introduction. My name is Rahina Anand. I'm the Executive Director for Global Publishing Development at PLOS. And as I was saying earlier, we're a full open science publisher. We're not for profit and we're mission driven. And I'm going to talk a bit more about our mission and how that leads us to want to try to increase equitable participation in open science. But we actively strive for openness and transparency throughout the whole research communication process. And that's because of the benefits they bring to knowledge dissemination, but also importantly to its utility and its reproducibility. And therefore, we're very much purposefully open by design. So from our inception, we at PLOS have been focused on catalysing broad-scale systemic change. And so in the early noughties, in the early 2000s, we recognised that most existing journals were resistant to changing their business practices. And so in 2003, we launched our first fully open access journal in order to empower researchers to make their science and research more immediately and publicly available online without restrictions. And our article processing or publication, or APC, as you're probably familiar with, charge and model, it was revolutionary at the time, and it paved the way for a new wave of publishing options and ensured the future of open access. It showed that open access could be a viable model for publication. And what we learned from that is that catalysing change is possible. Over the past 20 years, we've helped to prove the viability of open access, and it's now mainstream. And we changed the publishing landscape via PLOS One, which is our broad, multidisciplinary publication, which is inclusive of all rigorous and ethical research. We helped focus the conversation about peer review on rigour and transparency, and we demonstrated the importance of open data availability. But we've also learned that there have been unintended consequences. Our APC model and author pays models in general through all article processing or publication charges are exclusionary, and they create a barrier to inclusion in knowledge sharing. And so I'll talk later about how we're trying to start to address that. We've come a long way in the last 20 years, but the key benefits of open access remain the same, namely that authors retain copyright to their work, but that research, importantly, is not only free to read, but also to download, to share and to reuse because of the license that's associated with it. Open access facilitates wider dissemination of research, meaning it can be more visible. And there are now multiple studies showing how open access publications have both a download and a citation advantage. And barriers to that knowledge are removed, not just for the academic community, but more broadly for policymakers, for students, even the general public, enabling more impact for researchers' work and the ability for more discoveries to be made that build on that work. But I'm here to talk about open science rather than open access. Open access is a part of that, but we're thinking here about open science and what it means for knowledge dissemination and communication, and for knowledge utility and reproducibility. And so, of course, an obvious place to start with this is the UNESCO Open Science Recommendation that Anna was talking about earlier. And the recommendation, why it's so important and so groundbreaking, is that for the first time it gives us a common global definition for open science. and importantly, one that many countries and stakeholders around the globe have helped to define. And therefore, it's a really incredibly powerful starting point for various stakeholders to align around. But the reason I'm talking about it again is there are a few key parts that I think it's useful to highlight when we're talking around open science, because it shows how open science as a concept has equitable participation at its core. So firstly, and fundamentally, inclusiveness is not only part of open science, but core to its principles. Open science isn't one thing, but a combination of various movements and practices, all of which contribute to making knowledge more available, more accessible, and more reproducible. Ultimately, so that knowledge can have the tangible desired effect, both for further knowledge creation, but also for society and humanity. Open science should enable and facilitate global collaboration and participation, and it focuses on the processes of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and communication. Importantly, it applies to all disciplines, not just scientific, technical, engineering, or medical ones. So when we talk about science in the term open science, we're actually talking about it as an organized system of criticism, rather than a specific discipline or disciplines. But how then do we move from talking about open access to open science and open research more broadly? Well, rather than being a standalone or a separate part of the scientific or research enterprise, openness can and should be intrinsic to the whole research lifecycle. So that means from ideation and planning and designing research, to conducting research, generating knowledge, to validating, analysing and interpreting that knowledge, through to dissemination and reporting and sharing it. And as the UNESCO Open Science definition says, opening the processes of scientific knowledge, creation, evaluation, and communication, not just one output, to everyone. From our perspective at PLOS, open science, therefore, is about more than being able to just read or access an article. It's about providing the right context to understand it, the resources to replicate it, as well as the tools to collaborate and to make science better. And it enables equitable participation in knowledge creation and sharing. What does open science look like, therefore, in evaluating and communicating research? What does it look like in publishing? And I think there are, hopefully this slide presents a useful way of categorizing some open science philosophies and practices in publishing. So one of those categories would be transparent processes. And here we're talking about identifiers and taxonomies, for example, such as ORCID, which ensures that researchers' work is properly attributed and that they receive credit for it. Through to credit, which is a taxonomy that ensures each author's individual contribution to research is identified and defined in the paper. Preprints. This is where authors share an early version of the work and get early public comments. And preprints can enable rapid dissemination of results. They can enable groups of researchers to establish priority for their work and hopefully facilitate greater attention via citations. One important transparent process is open peer review. And what we're talking about here is open or transparent peer review, meaning that the peer review materials are accessible. So that means the peer reviews plus the editor comments. However, what it doesn't mean is that the peer review processes are any less rigorous or robust than they would usually be, or that the usual ethical checks are not applied. Only that those relevant and related materials are accessible to all. Another important part of open science and publishing is access and sharing of multiple research outputs. And by sharing a multiplicity of outputs, this means we can give a fuller picture of the research that's being done and tell the whole research story. So that might involve open data, code, or methods, or through to protocols, sharing reagents and reporting checklists, all of which hopefully contribute to greater reproducibility and the ability for that knowledge to be used and to be built on. Another really important area is how we can counter publication bias via open science practices. And when I'm talking about publication bias here, what I mean is where papers that report positive results are more likely to be published. So one of the ways to counter that is via, for example, a registered report, which is a publication that outlines the planned research, but importantly, where there's a commitment to publish the outcomes, as long as the research is carried out in a methodologically and ethically rigorous manner, i.e., irrespective of the perceived significance of the findings. And we've tried to evolve our journals to really focus on the importance of the research question as another way of countering publication bias. So we've done that by focusing on the importance of the research question itself and the rigor of the research being done, rather than just how exciting the result is or is perceived to be. Because if a research question is worthy of funding or resourcing, then the outcome should be worthy of sharing. So all of these move us from publishing as an event that happens when an article appears to become a process that better mirrors how research is communicated, how research is carried out and then communicated. I'd like to give an example of this, one more example of what I was talking about with inclusive criteria. Because, and why I want to highlight this is because I think it shows how inclusive criteria are also possible for selective journals, those journals that we might consider those high impact ones. So an example I want to use here is PLOS Biology, because it is a selective journal, but we know that selectivity has contributed partly to that reproducibility crisis in biology and biomedicine. And that's because of a culture where research showing what are perceived to be exciting results are valued over studies confirming results. So as I was saying earlier, we've evolved our journals, and here we've redefined that selectivity to offer more inclusive criteria by focusing on the importance of the research question and the rigor of that research, rather than just how exciting that result is. So as questions for publication, we ask, what's the contribution to the scientific process? Are we learning something that will significantly advance its field, independent of the outcome? And are the approaches used adequate to answer the question in the best possible way? And of course, has the research been executed to a high standard? So in PLOS Biology, we have pre-registered research, data, but also discovery reports. And these share the discovery phase of research, as well as linked update articles which can share confirmatory or contradictory findings, all of which hopefully allows researchers to publish without introducing pressure to have that complete story. One more example of the inclusiveness at the core of our journals and our publishing is our recent inclusion in global research editorial policy. And we developed this to address the issue of parachute research, which is also sometimes known as helicopter or neo-colonial science. And this occurs when researchers travel to under-resourced communities, they conduct their research, and they leave, but often with little understanding or the involvement of the local communities they've studied, and few direct benefits to those local participants. So to try and counter this, we developed a questionnaire with members of our editorial community, and this questionnaire outlines ethical, cultural, and scientific considerations specific to inclusivity in global research. And that asks, for example, the reasons why if there are no local authors included on the authorship list. And all this information is then provided to editors and reviewers during the peer review process, so that they can, to help them assess whether the research meets the journal's standards for the ethics of experimentation and research integrity. So as well as evolving our journals to better reflect the research process, we design them with open science principles and practices at their core. We know that for us to have a meaningful impact, we need to include the broadest range of researcher voices globally. And so our new journals have been designed and have created, and we've tried to create diverse communities of practice to ensure that they're at the forefront of shaping how we address the most pressing health and environmental issues facing our society. So these titles ensure diversity and equity of representation at all levels: editors, editorial boards, reviewers, authors, and we actively seek out research from underrepresented communities. So as well as designing our journals to align with open science philosophical principles, we've embedded an integrated open science practice within them. To do that, we defined 14 open science features that would be core to publishing in the portfolio. And they span the whole publishing process, as you can see by the timeline on the slide, and they embody the principles shown. For example, those of accessibility, diversity, immediacy, and so on. These are the 14 key open science features that I just referenced. The color coding aligns with that I showed you on the timeline on the previous slide to show which part of the research cycle each corresponds to. And I'm not expecting you to read the tiny writing underneath, but those are the principles that each is supposed to help support. So these practices include some with which researchers will be very familiar with, such as preprints and open licenses, but also those which may be less familiar, such as open code. But in all those practices, we look to lead in encouraging open science practice, but we also work with our diverse communities to ensure adoption of these features can be as streamlined and painless as possible, so as to increase engagement and adoption of these practices. As I referenced earlier, though, we've seen unintended consequences in this transition to open access in particular. The major one being author pays models through article processing or publication charges. We know that they're exclusionary and can create a barrier to inclusion in knowledge sharing. So as well as moving beyond the article as part of open science, we also need to move beyond the APC or article processing and publication charge, which is still the predominant business model we see in open access publishing. So at PLOS, we're trialling new models to try and address this. And these models aim to take the burden off individual researchers and spread the cost more equitably amongst institutions. For example, our global equity model doesn't work on the basis of a per article or a per unit payment to access a publishing service. And moreover, it reflects countries' financial situations by relating to the World Bank criteria. And institutions in Research for Life countries can participate in both models for free, meaning authors from institutions in those countries could publish for free in the journals included in the models, subject, of course, to the usual acceptance criteria. And our community action publishing model is similar in that we developed this model to move away from APCs and to spread those costs more equitably among institutions. The difference with our community action publishing model is it accounts for the fact that the journals within there, PLOS Biology and PLOS Medicine, are selective journals. And so again, we're trying to demonstrate that even publishing in selective journals is possible without really high article publication charges. I also wanted to flag and show that we conduct and publish a number of pieces of research off our own backs. And that's both on our open science practices, but also more broadly around the open science landscape, for example, stakeholder and user needs around open science. And of course, we publish as much of this information and research and analysis as possible, really to encourage, we hope, further engagement and adoption around open science. Because for us, it's not just about applying open science features within the portfolio, it's about showing the outcomes of that and the impact, like I said, hopefully to encourage more engagement and adoption. So open science, we think there's a virtuous circle of benefits for research, for researchers and for institutions, because by opening research to more expert perspectives and feedback earlier in the research process, open science contributes to high quality, reproducible and reliable research. By making more of the artifacts of research and peer review public, open science, sorry, I've gone too far, I'll come back. By making more of the artifacts of research and peer review public, open science can demonstrate the trust and integrity of that research and of the researchers themselves who are sharing those, that multiplicity of outputs. Research careers are built on scholarly output, and open science offers a broader range of publication options, including study designs, data, code, methods, peer reviews, and other research products. So researchers can share more of their science. And together, more published research outputs and more detailed and accurate reports can help researchers showcase their work, build their reputation, and raise their profile. All of this together, high caliber research, well-regarded researchers, and measurable demonstrated impact all contribute to an institutional reputation for excellence, progressiveness, and leadership, thereby completing that virtual and virtuous circle. So I'll finish off now by saying at PLOS, we've always worked to raise the bar for openness. We've intentionally moved from open access to open science to continue to try to define new routes to equitable participation in line with both our own mission and values, but also with those principles and values espoused by the UNESCO Open Science Recommendation. And I said it earlier, but I'm going to say it again. We know that a rigid approach to open science is not going to foster the equitable participation in open science that we want to see from all communities and all parts of the research ecosystem. So that's why we're continuing to evolve and trial new models, new products, new services. But to do that, it's fundamental that we continue that work for you. I'm not sure if I got cut off there, apologies. But yes, it's important. Yes, hi.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So I was finishing off. I was just saying, to be able to do that, to continue to try to find or to develop open science solutions that work for communities in their cultural contexts, it's fundamental that we all work together as the relevant and the range of stakeholders who are part and parcel of delivering that, whether that be publishers, whether that be institutional leaders, researchers, policymakers, funders, and governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rohina and Nad, for that presentation. It was knowledge packed, and I believe that we all have learned a thing or two from your presentation. I would call up Ms. Joy Wango to moderate the session for the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dako. We've had amazing presentations this morning, beginning with the overview of the Association of African Universities, what the regional hubs are, what the intentions of the regional hubs are, and what how the activities involved in supporting open science in their respective regions, and also the mandates of the Association of African Universities. And also we've had the presentations from our speakers, Mr. Emmanuel Boache and Dr. Anna Pasik and Ms. Rohina Anand. All of them gave us different perceptions on the activities that are being done in the continent in regards to open science, and also gave us a global overview of what needs to be done, or what is actually being done. Now, I cannot overemphasize the importance of open science and how it supports the visibility of research institutes. It supports the visibility of universities and also researchers. Yes, there will be unintended consequences. I'm glad all the speakers were very clear about that. We are not being blind about some of the challenges that may come with it, but these are manageable challenges. We're also aware that not everything is open. We can open to what is allowed, and we can close what is to the degree of what is allowed. Basically, what we are trying to push for amongst all of us as stakeholders is make research equitable, make science accessible, but also equitable. And with that said, having got a perspective from the global, from a global perspective to now a continental perspective, I await some of the questions that you may have for any of our speakers in regards to the activities that are happening on open science in Africa, and the activities that you need to be aware of on how your respective institutions can be supported in making sure that you end up having open science mandates, if it means increased awareness or further understanding of what these concepts are. So kindly I await your questions. Are there any questions or comments? And in the meantime, kindly fill in the survey that has been shared by not only me, but also the team from AAU. Kindly fill in your survey. We want to know if you have a better understanding on what open science entails and what kind of support systems you will provide to support, to make sure that your institute ends up adopting open science practices. Yes, Karen. Ms. Mayers, you're on mute. Please unmute, ma'am.
I was trying.
There we go.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by commending, the AAU and TCC Africa for hosting this very important week and talking about open science and its principles. For me, one of the very important things is, and sometimes we overlook it, is the link between open science and the teachers, those practitioners that link content with other stakeholders. And that is why I think, today's activity is extremely important, because it gives practitioners an opportunity to learn new concepts and then reflect on how to bring them in. I mean, as universities, we might, or as university, professors and lecturers, we're probably aware of open science principles, but are we applying them even when we work with our students? That's my main reflection, and thank you for that.
Thank you. That's a very good comment. Yeah, this is why we are having this meeting. We need increased awareness on it, and how do we apply it? How do we present it? Some of us will be presenting some of these concepts to Senate. It's an issue of making the leadership within your universities understand how open science supports various facets within the university. It's no longer librarians' conversation, because it started from there. Now it is at the researchers level, directors of research, DVC. By the time it reaches the vice chancellor's desk, the question is, how best do you explain to them these latest concepts and how it can support their respective institutes? Thank you so much, Ms. Myers, for that comment. Any other question or concerns? This is a safe space for us to share concerns or even fears on what entails open science. Okay. Yes, Pfizer. Ms. Pfizer, over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I'm talking about as open as possible, as closed as possible. I think in Africa, we're still lacking the dissemination of knowledge about ethics and governance, even capacity building and guidelines. Without ethics and governance, we will find that we can go in an opposite direction of our objectives. What do you think about ethics and guidelines?
Okay, Rohina, that is for you on ethics and guidelines and governance, and I will talk about what we are doing with some of the supranational policymakers in the region, to just give an overview, at least what's happening in Eastern Africa.
I think Anna's perspective might be useful as well. From the publisher
Anna
perspective,
as well. Is Anna in?
I'm not sure actually, but I can start off.
I'm here.
Yes, okay. Then you start, Anna, then I'll talk about what's happening in the region. Yes.
Shall I go first? So, because I think
yes,
from a
please.
publisher perspective, from a publisher perspective, that is fundamental to the credibility, the validity of that research. So, as I was saying earlier, with all those categories of what open science means in publishing, fundamental to that is that the research is conducted to a high standard, that we see that the ethics of experimentation have been applied, that there is integrity, that research. So that is part of publishing in our journals, that there will be those checks that mean that knowledge can be relied on, if you see what I mean, and that transparent and open for us is just about that accessibility. It doesn't mean that those ethics, those standards haven't been applied to reviewing the knowledge that has been submitted to us. So that's from the publisher perspective and publishing in our venues, but I'll pass over to Anna now.
Yeah, thank you, Rohina. I mean, this is along the lines of also what I was saying before, and I think in a way that the recommendation can also give it's a normative standard setting instrument, but it also gives some of these ethical guidelines as to the practice of open science and what it means, particularly when it comes to responsible research and of course high quality research. I am not sure if there is what would be the additional guidance or guidelines that would be needed, but it would be very interesting to understand what would be the needs and then to try to see how we can collectively work to provide those type of very specific guidelines. Is it for responsible research? Is it in specific domains or disciplines? Is it with regards to sharing of data, to publishing? Again, building on what the publishers are already doing, such as PLOS, or what the UNESCO recommendation is highlighting, we can tease out some of these additional ethical guidelines for research conduct.
Thank you, Anna. So I'll add my comments to what is happening at a regional level. The good news is, and it's a good thing, Pfizer, Miss Pfizer, you're from Eastern Africa. The good thing is that we're already seeing the regional supranational policymakers taking a keen interest in open science, and they want to include it in some of some of the policies that they have already embedded and that have been ratified in the region. So what this means is that they are very conscious of contextualizing open science and even the ethics and ethos that come with it, such that researchers' interests are protected and also the regional interests are protected. So we are already seeing these conversations beginning, and with very soon, most likely by Q1 of next year, we are going to see some very good developments, at least from Eastern Africa, where we have the East African Parliament coming up with bringing up these conversations on open science. And trust me, they are including it with some of the existing policies that support research and higher education. So basically the STI policies. So we are going to see all this being put into play because they are riding on what is already working within the region so that it supplements some of these policies. But that's a very good question. And yes, they have been contextualized to the region, at least in Eastern Africa. Though some similar discussions are also happening in Western Africa, which will also keep you updated. And as Dr. Pasek mentioned, that this begins at a global level. This is where we have the UNESCO recommendations. But then by the time it's contextualized at a regional to even a national, even granular to an institutional level, all these aspects of the ethics pertaining to the region or the institute that is going to implement open science is always taken into play. And it also involves multi-stakeholder conversations. And that is what we are doing as TCC, bringing literally all the stakeholders together to have this conversation on open science so that it is everybody speaking one voice. By the time we have these policies out in the region or at a national or at an institutional level, everybody is having the same conversation on how open science can support them, and also making sure that any fears that are brought out are allayed and are allayed so that we do not have any challenges, any major challenges regarding the adoption of open science. I've seen two comments. Let me read them out. One is, there's one on, okay. So let's see, okay, I'm seeing questions in regards to publishing, but let me talk about the multi-sectoral cooperation. So there is a question on multi-sectoral cooperation and coordination, mixed method analysis and interdisciplinary cooperation are necessary for entrenching open science in higher education. That is very true. That is extremely true. And we are going to get more about that on the day after tomorrow, when we are going to have a speaker from the African Open Science Platform, because she'll be focusing, that is Dr. Nokuthula Mchunu. She'll be talking about the importance of multi-sectoral engagement in the adoption and implementation of open science. And also she's going to give the case study of what they're doing in South Africa. And yes, you further go ahead and say that there are inequalities and uneven power dynamics in each of these domains. And how can open science address them? And what are the limitations of open science? So number one, Anna, you can answer that. Emmanuel, are you willing to answer that as well? I will answer at one bit. I support the need for the multi-sectoral engagement. It's already happening. This is why, even as TCC, we are bringing literally all the stakeholders together to have this conversation on open science, because our main goal is to make sure that the policies are created. And for policies to be created, it means that everybody has to speak the same voice in regards to open science. Yes, we are not blind to the fact that there are inequalities and there are also uneven dynamics within some of these domains. The question is, like any other policy that needs to be entrenched in any country or any institute, number one, you always need to get somebody who will help in riding, an influential person who will help in riding that conversation. And in East Africa, I can give an example. We are very fortunate. We have two organizations. We have the East African Commission of Science and Technology there and the Inter-University Councils of East Africa. It's an issue of getting some of these stakeholders together, getting one of these stakeholders who believe in what you're trying to push, and then use their influence to influence the region. And of course, with the Association of African Universities, we're also working with the regional nodes as well. So I do not deny about the power dynamics. It's an issue of getting one of the stakeholders in that realm who can help influence that change. That is all, honestly, I can share with you. And the limitations of open science, yes, this is what Dr. Anna Pasik was talking about, some of the unintended consequences, okay? And she's also mentioned how these can be allayed, but I'll hand over to Dr. Pasik to talk about the limitations of open science and the unintended consequences and challenges that come with open science.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. So yes, I I said a few words before, and there are of course the challenges of open science that we talked about before, and some of these unintended consequences. For example, as Ruhina was saying, and maybe she can say a little bit more with regards to the APCs, the article processing charges, or the use of data that can be that can get problematic in certain cases. But as we said, once you have identified an issue, whether it's with open science or any other issue, you can put people together who can actually start to address that issue. So that's the case with the APCs. What are some alternative models? That's the case with open data, where there is more and more emphasis on which data is shared, how is it shared, what are the protocols, how is the community ownership of the different platforms, etc. So if there is a will and if there are clear benefits for the different communities that are involved in open science, then there is also a way to address some of those issues, whether from the international perspective or from a more specific, domain-specific perspective. Policies, of course, as Joy was saying, are also very important, because not only do they give the structure, but they also, in a way, should provide commitment to open science, including in terms of human and financial resources, to ensure that indeed open science is conducted in line with the values and principles, for example, in the UNESCO recommendation on open science, and that these unintended consequences are reduced to the minimum or addressed as soon as they appear. So I hope this this helps in answering the question. If there is anything else that you would like to ask, I'll be happy to respond. Thanks.
Is there any other question? Rohina, would you like to add to that? Emmanuel, would you like to add to that?
Yeah,
Around the APCs, I mean, I suppose.
No, the unintended consequences and challenges that come with open science.
Yeah, just, well, like I referenced earlier, I mean, there were unintended consequences. We were successful at PLOS at catalyzing, a real transformation of the publishing industry, ensuring that at least open became mainstream, a mainstream option offered by, you know, the majority of publishers now. But unfortunately, one side effect of that has been the predominance of APCs as the predominant business model that we see employed, and a wide range of APC levels, which is problematic. And while most publishers will offer waivers to researchers in less resourced countries, they're not a sustainable or long-term solution, and again put the burden on individual researchers to seek out the relevant information, to apply for waivers, etc. So at PLOS, we have been and we are being purposeful in trying to move away from that. We've said, well, okay, we showed that open can work to a certain extent, but this is an unintended consequence of that with this business model. So let's try different ones that we hope can work in a sustainable and long-term fashion, because there are costs we need to cover as part of publishing to ensure that the research that
Rohina, she has dropped off, unfortunately. Emmanuel, in the meantime, you may please answer the question if you have a few comments on the unintended consequences on open science.
Yeah, I think almost all the movements under open science acknowledge the fact that there are inequalities that are there. And that is why it's an all-inclusive movement where we need every voice to be spoken and accounted for. When you look at LipSense project, they are looking at collaborating with local and regional education networks. And I think these discussions help the movement to know how the inequalities are in various aspects of the regions, and then see how best.
I'm very sorry, I had connection issues. I dropped off there.
Okay. And see how best they can come up with solutions that better the various regional education networks. So I think one way to address this inequality is to ensure that we get involved in the various movements that are around us locally, and then meet these aspects and find solutions that are better suited for our region or our locality. So I think that is one way we can go about this to ensure that everyone is not left behind in the movement for open science.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you so much. Ms. Anand, please finish your comments. Welcome back.
Hi, apologies. I think my connection is a bit unstable, so apologies if I go again. But I mean, I think I heard this correctly, but I would agree with Emmanuel. The solutions need to fit cultural contexts, and so what we can do is trial new business models, etc. But actually, in terms of those long-term solutions for adoption of open science, it involves events such as this, where we work with stakeholders to understand challenges and pain points and barriers, and then hopefully to work alongside and with them to develop solutions that work in those contexts. In the broader global picture, yes, we will keep trying different ways to move away from APCs, and some will work and some won't. And we're open about that. We're open about everything. But yes, that's all we can keep doing, is trying new things and working with stakeholders to develop solutions that do work for them in their context, so that no one is left behind, and so that we can have that equitable participation in open science.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rohina. And I'll hand it over to you, Ms. Dako. I believe we are done with the session. Ms. Dako? Ms. Dako, are you there?
Hi, Joy, I'm here.
Yes.
Thank you so much for moderating the session, the Q&A session for us. Yeah, of course, all too soon we've come to the end of today's session. As promised, we've had an educating and of course an impactful session today. I'm sure everyone connected can attest to the fact that today has been an insightful and a successful one. We got the chance to learn about what open science is, the various subfields and key areas to look at in terms of open access, open data, and open peer review. We also got the chance to learn about some key recommendations on open science, the global and continental perspectives on open science, the publisher's perspective, of course, on providing equity, and the numerous benefits for researchers, and institutions with regards to open science. I'd also like to thank all of you, the participants, especially those who made inputs and shared contributions and also asked intriguing questions for more perspective on the theme. We at AAU here are grateful for your time. I would like to thank the partner organizations, UNESCO, PLOS, TCC Africa's PLOS, Open Access 2020, and of course, University of Cape Town. I would also like to thank the regional offices for their representation here and for getting the people from their various regions to participate in our event. I thank all stakeholders, presidents, rectors, vice chancellors, directors, and everyone from the African Higher Education Institution for representing today. For tomorrow, it will be a members only session, and so a special link will be sent to our members for them to participate. But I'll be back on Wednesday with another packed knowledge-filled session. We shared a survey in the chat box. We would want to get your responses from the chat box. So kindly click on the link in the chat box to respond to the survey that we shared. Please note that all the presentations, the various presentations that was made today will be shared with all of you at the end of the session. Thank you so much for making time to join us and for your contributions to making this program a success. See you on Wednesday.
Naomi, please remember to announce the North Africa event.
Yes, please. Yes. There is a North Africa regional event today with regards to the celebration of the African Universities Day. The link was posted in the chat box. I will just retweet or repost it for those in the North Africa region to participate. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a nice day. Thank you. You have done very, very well. Thank you.